please be very warm to welcome to the stage the President of the Republic of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid.
Welcome to Estonia, welcome to Tallinn. Unstoppable development of technology, industrial revolutions, they have shaped our Earth drastically and driven us to a point where crucial decisions have to be made. We represent just 0.01% of all life on our planet, but our impact on ecosystems has been disproportionately big. Once again, we are moving through uncharted territory where many expectations are put on new technologies. It reminds me of the heroic age of exploration, where technology which was yet missing was replaced by never-ending curiosity, courage, and patience of man to discover our planet. Your predecessors, transport and logistics sector, Captain Cook, Vasco da Gama, all the others. But now, climate change and environmental degradation are indeed the greatest challenges humans have ever faced. Mobility has always been closely coupled with globalization and economic growth. Modern patterns of mobility, evolved by personal interest like tourism and employment, or by cargo trade, were developed in a world where increasing mobility couldn't be seen in any ways as a threat. Increased possibilities to move meant more freedom and added opportunities for both private people and the companies. For the latter, expanding the market increased chances to grow and make more profit. It all became possible because of the progress of transportation and logistics. Innovation made traveling faster and more feasible. As a result, we have never been as mobile as we are today. The planet is physically still the same size, but travel distances measured in time have diminished remarkably. Jules Verne wrote an adventure novel around the world in 80 days. Today, this title would have to be adjusted if such a book were written. Global tourism has increased exponentially since the end of the Second World War. In the 50s, when most of the traveling was still done by ships and trains, about 1 in 100 people was taking part in international tourism. As soon as commercial air traffic started to climb, of course, the tourism went up. Today, people fly more and further every year. The growth of budget airlines has made traveling affordable for many. In 2018, a record of 1.4 billion international tourist visits was made, which makes every 6th person traveling internationally today. This number keeps rising, and after the next 20 years, we know it will have almost doubled. Tourism is an increasingly important in global economy. According to the latest research, it is already responsible for about 8% of global CO2 emissions, the number being 4 times larger than previously thought it would be at this point in time. Around 40 million flights with 4 billion individual passenger journeys take place in 1 year. The air transport doubles in size at least once every 15 years. Even more dramatic growth has been taking place in domestic mobility, at least in most countries. 7 times more cars are produced today than 60 years ago. Production is reaching over 70 million cars in a year and continues to grow at an astonishing rate of doubling every 20 years. We can expect to see close to 3 billion vehicles on this planet in 2036. Most of us would not even be retired by that time. International trade has increased fast, and it is now a fundamental part of economic activity. It has been growing faster than global GDP, and today about 1/4 of total global production is always exported. Exports soared exponentially in the 50s and are today more than 40 times larger than 100 years ago. By volume, more than 80% of this global trade floats from place to place on ships. Global fleet is 50,000 vessels. It is the backbone of the world trade. Our own Baltic Sea here has the highest concentration of ships in Europe. About 2,000 sizable ships are at the sea at any time. This is positive. However, in the 60s and 70s, the first signs of environmental concern started to rise and sparked the modern environmental movement. In 1972, the report Limits to Growth was published by the Club of Rome. This was the beginning of the big discussion on sustainability, based on an intricate series of computer models developed by MIT professors. And this predicted this exponential growth in economy and population and travel. It warned that the chasing of ever greater economic growth will undoubtedly lead us to a climate catastrophe. The report seemed to be doing very well. It sold in millions of copies in more than 30 languages. It affected both environmental policy and global awareness for decades. Technological optimism from the 50s and the 60s started to show also the first signs of the side effects. However, unlike today, it was all too easily still forgotten. And the reason for it was that the real effects were missing. These were predictions. But the predictions were in fact correct, and today we already see the real effects. Technological advancements in transportation have strongly influenced our mobility. And this sector is now responsible for approximately a quarter of human-caused CO2 emissions. In Europe, it is the single biggest source of anthropogenic CO2. Today, we know that the energy sector is relatively easy to revamp and redesign so that the CO2 emissions would stop. But clean transportation solutions, they have proven to be much more difficult. Transportation sector is more fragmented and diverse, and the carbon neutrality goal in the transport sector is one of the hardest tasks to solve. There is no single universal solution, as there isn't also in energy sector. But in energy sector, technologies are developed enough for us to understand how we can move forward. And they are not so expensive that we cannot decide today with clear forward effect that we want to have our energy sector CO2 neutral by 2050. It's much more difficult to decide so in the transport sector because there are no ready-made solutions on the table. And I'm one of those who thinks that humankind is never ready to move too much their personal economic goalposts to accommodate sustainability. They are ready when the technologies are there and they see that the expense does not exceed too much, 5%, 10% maybe, change too much their lifestyle. We have reached this now in energy sector, but of course in transport sector, this is still to be seen. Yes, there is electrical transport. Yes, we can foresee hydrogen transport coming along. Yes, it can happen on land, on railways, on roads, on the sea. But what about the air transport? We all know that there are not so many, even in pilot programs, of electrical planes. There are few plans of water planes, small ones to go into commercial flights in the coming years. And the hydrogen planes, well, not much heard yet about them. Therefore, in transport sector, if we want to continue and we don't want to move too much our goalposts as far as development is concerned, this comes down to smart innovation much more than we need in energy sector. In energy sector, this smart innovation cycle has started already. It's there, it's present. We simply need to do what we know we need to do. But in transport, we must try. We must try to really make sure that at least efficiency gains, which can be found, will be there. I know among you here are also those who develop smarter logistics systems. And we know that smarter systems always mean more information on both supply side and the side of a consumer about what is available, which should lead us to the situation where the prices fluctuate from the peak channels to the less important channels in this way that cargo and goods and people will fill all the channels this way that at least in the system there is no loss of resources because sometimes you travel empty. This is maybe the lowest hanging fruit in transport sector, where I can see that the role of matching small consumers and small offer will create big effects at one point. I hope you will be discussing today these kind of developments and solutions as well. The rest, I don't think we are anywhere close to understanding where these flight systems, which will be CO2 neutral, will be. Therefore, I think this sector needs to shoulder part of the responsibility for carbon capture in our economies. There are certain ways of doing it, some less developed, some more developed, some small scale, some higher scale. But here in Estonia, tech companies have made a pledge to become climate neutral by 2035. Among them, by the way, are also a few who actually provide transportation services, like Bolt, for example. The only way they can see in a so quick period of time, less than 10 years, climate neutrality is offsetting. So I hope you will be discussing offsetting measures and how your sector collectively can partake in providing us all with a reliable means of carbon capture. Yes, it means that there will be costs added to what you're all doing. But, you know, globally, we know that if sectors can innovate themselves and come up with market-based solutions themselves, then the big market distortions operated by the regulators might not be necessary. And I think this should be your driving force behind participating in it. Yes, I do admit that unlike in energy sector, regulators today don't dare to give forward guidance on climate neutrality in transportation sector because the technologies are not there. But sooner or later, they will do it unless the sector itself creates the necessary solutions and can show the way into the clean future. Necessity is the mother of invention. This is what a well-known proverb says. Coming years shall show how much of an inventor there is in us. And of course, it will depend on how urgent you see the situation to be. I see it to be quite urgent, actually. But again, I know that the planet can only be saved if these solutions are palatable for consumers. And if they are based on market, then no one should lose out. As soon as the regulation comes in, then normally also the subsidies come in, and then investing against the market becomes trickier and trickier. I see this happening in the energy market right now. I think you can all learn from that example and make sure that in your sector, when the transformation happens, it will be purely market-based. Yes, it would need smart legislation to create the necessary space for new technologies, but it has to be a free market where everybody can invest in new technologies against the market. Otherwise, it will be unfair to some companies, and some will, of course, benefit, as we know, from state subsidies. We are from the Nordic area of Europe, and we know that here state has a long-standing habit of choosing what is good and investing in it, sometimes missing some other things which could be as good as well. So while innovating and proposing the new solutions, I also invite you to keep an eye on it, that you will keep this vibrant free market, which is the transport sector today. I wish you all the best in your discussions. And I would also like to say that there are not only costs, there are also benefits from stopping the climate change. Curbing the global warming could save us all 20 trillion of USD. This is not a small amount of money. Just the day before, here in Estonia, we faced a strong storm, which we are not used to seeing here. Our Australian host just said that it's almost tropical outside in Tallinn. He's right. It shouldn't be so warm at this time of the year. Our fish here in Estonia, who are used to lay their eggs under ice in April, well, they cannot adjust to laying the eggs in February. They will just die. Probably this is not what you expected me to speak about, but I think it is important that you try to find solutions, market-based solutions among yourself, before far too heavy regulation sets in, and it will set in otherwise. Thank you for listening.